To everyone who's watching on the Facebook stream that decided to stay at home because it was raining, you suck. Turn off now. You don't deserve it. The magic is here in the room, I think. Let's play the film. So thank you and welcome to tonight's adventure through the landscapes of film, animation, and the imaginary worlds of science fiction. My name is Liam Young. As Olga mentioned, I'm teaching on the core faculty here in the New Normal. And in this program at Strelka, we've spent the last 3 years scratching at the surface of the strange new realities that the planetary-scaled technologies that we fill our world with have set in motion. In the midst of such bizarre conditions of crisis and catharsis, of AI in the wild, of cryptocurrencies and cosmotechnics, sometimes a moment or a place is best understood by examining the stories we construct about it. And that's what we're going to do here tonight. Because in other worlds, we're interested in the ways that our perception of the world is largely shaped through the mediums of fiction. Our political positions are informed by fake news. We live out our lives in the pixelated territories of video games, and we escape into the flicker of a movie screen or a glowing rectangle. In film, games, and fictions, we imagine alternative worlds as a means to understand our own world in new ways. Such stories can transport us from the strange worlds that we see on the screen behind us. Sometimes they're an antidote to an angry and broken world. Sometimes we tell stories to comfort us, to educate us or empower us, to add mystery or to strip it away, to fall in love all over again, or to scream as loud as we can with rage. We craft tales of otherness because perhaps in the new normal, such madness is the only way of staying sane. So our journey in other worlds has been organized across 2 evenings. Last night we boarded our spaceships and toured the multiverse and distant galaxies of Rick and Morty and Star Wars with art director Claire Fleming and storyboard artist Douglas Einar Olsen. And tonight we take a ride into the future and we explore the tortured technologies and neon streets of our science fiction imaginaries. We'll be joined by concept designer Mike Hill and director and designer Ash Thorp to discuss how they imagine tomorrow's worlds and create the artifacts and atmospheres of our urban futures. We'll finish the evening with a discussion and exclusive screening of Ash Thorp's array of independent short films, which are all vignettes and glimpses into a stylized world of fog-filled cities, digital bodies, and distant satellites. In other words, we discuss why we build worlds and how we might do it. We're going to tour through an atlas of imaginaries, worlds of sensuality and horror, of culture and collapse, of fear and wonder that are both thrilling and strange, necessary and urgent. So let's strap in, let's put on our blankets, buckle our spacesuits, strap on your goggles and tuck in your capes as we head off into other worlds. Could we, oh yeah, clap, thank you. Could we play Mike's intro slide, please? So our first stop tonight, the neon dream has faded. we're washing away in acid rain, somewhat appropriate for tonight. We're going to tour through the streets of Blade Runner 2049, where the rain of Moscow gives way to the reign of the faded robot utopia. Mike Hill is a concept artist who has worked on world builds for films such as Blade Runner 2049, the TV show Love, Death and Robots, the forthcoming film June, and games such as Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Mike tells stories with objects, places, and characters, conjuring futures and vicious tomorrows. Mike is going to take us to contact alien universes and back again, and we'll examine how metaphor is often our co-pilot on journeys through the imagination. Let's all welcome Mike to the stage.
Appreciate it. I need to log in, I think. Hey guys, can you hear me okay? I'm testing exactly how close this thing should be to my face. Can you hear me at the back? All right, that guy there, he's my assistant. All right, bear with me 2 secs while we go through this complex login process. All right, so who, what, why? My name's Mike. I'm a designer, and I work in the film and games industry, pretty much what Liam just introduced me as. And what do? My kind of goal is to tell stories, and that is mainly using the visual medium by coming up with concepts and ideas and designs that manifest visually on the screen. But why do I do all this? I genuinely believe that design can be deeply, deeply meaningful and can affect us on a really fundamental level. And I kind of want to talk about that tonight, not necessarily by talking about my own stuff, which I'll briefly go across, but by talking about something that has inspired me for a long time. And it's this director, Robert Zemeckis, in this chair. This is a chair from a film called Contact, and it has been a really deep inspiration for me for a long time. And I want to kind of talk about it tonight and explain just how the ideas of Contact and this director kind of fed into what is a really amazing, fucking amazing scene in his, probably, in my opinion, his best movie. So my experience is that I've been a world designer and concept artist on games like Horizon Zero Dawn, where I was a world builder, which is about coming up with the background, civilizations, and the design of the world for this kind of future world where the human race has kind of disappeared off the face of the earth and has been replaced by robots that have a fundamentally different idea of navigating the wildness of Earth. I've been a level designer and production designer on games like Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, where I was designing complex levels and vehicles for the player to experience and navigate. More recently, I was hired by Tim Miller and David Fincher to operate as a production designer and brand strategist for Netflix's Love, Death and Robots. And also, something I'm going to talk about briefly is my experience working on Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 as a concept designer, which is about building the world and building the visuals that will communicate the story. My background or the way that I operate is either by using 2D illustration, traditional 2D illustration, to come up with architectural drawings, or using 3D software to come up with architectural visualization, trying to visualize the way a world should appear to a player or to a viewer. And that can drift into things like technical design, where I design things like vehicles and imagine a future using principles that I learned just by studying very, very layman engineering. I'm not an engineer, but I love reading up on the kind of way that engineers think and then trying to apply that to creating fictitious future designs. And it can range from coming up with kind of advanced complex spaces like aircraft carrier hangar bays of the future, but it can also come back to really, really kind of more small stuff where it's crafting kind of wooden sculptured staircases for games like Horizon Zero Dawn. So it goes from like the extreme large to the extreme small. But more recently, I was hired to help Denis Villeneuve and production designer Dennis Gassner develop the world of Blade Runner 2049, which was, it involved a whole bunch of different disciplines, from animation through to prop design, set design, and it was about kind of trying to help these guys visualize this world in a way that would deliver the story. And that involved a whole range of kind of design challenges, like designing the apartment of Ryan Gosling's character Kay, which involved like visualizing the inner spaces, as well as coming up with animations. So we might have some technical problems here. Bear with me 1 second. So guys, we're about to go on quite the adventure together. I'm going to be the pilot. Dasha, who is up in that window somewhere, is going to be the co-pilot. She's actually going to be the one handling the laptop and flicking between softwares and pressing the next page. This might work, it might not. But on the bright side, this is going to add a whole element of excitement to this presentation. All right, here we go. So, these are designs from Blade Runner. I did a bunch of stuff ranging from environments, sets, to props, to animations, to VFX. And then, Dasha, if we could cut to the video, that would be awesome. All right, we're in. So, designed Ryan Gosling's apartment, designing the actual inner space, the kitchen. That involved coming up with like animations and coming up with descriptions of how stuff should behave and how stuff should work. Including props like this, which is a prop for Dr. Anna Stelline, which is a complex device that helps her create memories. And if we could press N on the keyboard, that would be the video software, please. Yes, N.
This is an example. I can't really tell you what this is.
This is the final prop.
This is a device that's used, and it's completely analog. Every ring moves basically by touching any button, and basically they move at different speeds, and the speed is controlled by a little button over here. So it actually looks like a little bit like a focus puller's instrument, but when it's moving and operated properly, it's sort of like conducting a little bit of a symphony. Because you can slow things down, make little tweaks, and then you can speed it up and when you want certain things. But this is an interactive device within the movie that, again, I can't tell you much about at this point.
So my job is to come up with the designs and visualize them and animate them and describe the behavior of them so that a director like Denis Villeneuve can basically say whether it performs in his story or not. That particular prop was actually created for real. So inside of it was a bunch of servos that were engineered by a guy from General Dynamics who makes, he literally is an aeronautics engineer. So the actual prop itself was made to work so that the actress could actually interact with it and play the symphony, as it were, while she's creating these memories. And I'm just going to ask if we can go back to the video and press N. I'm just going to show the final scene.
Why are you so rude? What makes your memory so perfect?
And if we can cut back to the InDesign file, and let's see if this magical wand does something. Oh, yes. Was that you, Dasha? It's a one-way communication at this point. All right. No, I heard her say. All right, excellent. So the main thing that I'm really pleased about from working on Blade Runner is that from designing the main character's apartment, I can now honestly say that Ryan Gosling has had coffee in my kitchen, he's been naked in my shower, and he's had a really kinky threesome in my living room. So what I'm actually going to talk about now is none of my work, because I really want to talk about something that's inspired me for a long time, and it's something that's been guiding my process as I develop as a designer. And it's kind of finding interest in the way that the human mind, is primarily subconscious, and how it actually is responding to subconscious ideas. And to get that idea across, I actually just want to show a clip from one of my heroes, which is Christopher Nolan, acknowledging that the key for him understanding how to make great stories was understanding that actually the subconscious is the key to that process. So if we can cut back to the video player, please.
In studying English literature and talking a lot about it, I started to become more at ease with the idea that filmmakers, storytellers, they grasp evocative symbols, they grasp resonant imagery, and the reason these things are evocative and resonant is that they do have other layers, subconscious layers of resonance that the reader, or in the case of film, the filmgoer, can pick up on and interpret in their own way, and that is a valid approach. And that was something I, in retrospect, I very much needed to learn and get on board.
So this is one of the most important directors in Hollywood, expressing that the key to making great stories was understanding the importance of the subconscious. And the point of this talk tonight is that I want to emphasize the importance of the subconscious by using the design and the work of one of my favorite directors and one of my favorite stories. Contact is a film that was made as an adaptation of a Carl Sagan book. And the director that made it was this guy, Robert Zemeckis. You may have heard his name. If you haven't heard his name, he made films like Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Castaway. He's a real master of storytelling. And I don't know how many of you have seen Contact. Can I get a show of hands if you've seen Contact? All right, okay, so there's a few of you guys. In order to get across the scene that we're going to break down and to understand the design that we're going to analyze, I need to first give you some context, and I'm going to kind of take you through a summary of the story and the themes. I'm sorry if it's spoilers, but yeah. Okay, so our story starts, and our main character, who is called Ellie, her adult version is played by Jodie Foster, but her young version is this character here, and the beginning of the story kind of shows how Ellie's development is being nurtured by her loving father, who is teaching her how to understand reading the stars and using radio kind of telescopes and using radio transmitters. And the process that he's teaching her is using these devices in order to stay in contact with other people, which is defined by the visual design of the maps that are a visual symbol through the film. He also teaches her how to read the stars and how to use radio telescopes and telescopes in order to understand the universe outside. But one day he has a heart attack, he has a heart condition, and he has a heart attack that Ellie blames herself for not stopping because she didn't get to his medicine quick enough. At the funeral, there's an important scene where a pastor or a priest describes to her that we can't necessarily know God's plan, so things happen in a way that we can't understand or we can't make sense of. And this causes Ellie to become a very, very, very rigid and emotionally kind of blocked child that believes that the key to everything is through science and reason. So we cut, say, 20 years forward, and Ellie is this kind of isolated rationalist who is searching the stars and searching the outer cosmos for signs of life. But the big thematic concept that Zemeckis is playing with is that actually she's searching for her dad. She's searching for some kind of catharsis or an understanding of why her dad was taken from her. That's actually shown in the visual design in terms of visuals with maps, that as a child she uses her radio telescopes to contact people across America. But by the time she's an adult, she's using it to contact the vast vacuum that is space, and she has no contact or no faith in contact with other people. And if we can now cut to the video, this is her meeting a priest.
SETI. That's fringe. Cross paths with that before. I mean, something like that must really chat with that, no? Compass.
You better keep this. Might save your life.
Will you have dinner with me tonight?
Now, this scene is really important because it's the beginning of a thematic concept that goes through the whole film, and the compass is a very important design in the scene that we're going to analyze. The compass is a guide, it's a metaphor. So she uses these maps, initially a map of America, then the map of the stars, but she's still lost. And this compass is going to show up pretty soon in our scene, so I wanted to introduce it because it's going to be important. Now, there's a massive theme throughout the film of the difference between faith and reason. So we have one character that represents faith and emotionality, and then we have Ellie who's stuck in reason, and she only uses rationality. And the point of the film is to show the transformation of her into someone who's more balanced. So Father Joss, he desperately wants to continue seeing Ellie, but she kind of bats that off. And then we cut to another couple of years forward, and while she's searching the heavens for some kind of sign of life from distant universes, she receives a signal. And that signal contains deeply complex coded messages that she eventually decodes into blueprints for a machine. And this machine, she convinces everyone to build, and it looks a bit like this. And it's decided that she's going to be the one that pilots this machine to find out whoever this alien race that has sent this message of how to build this machine, she's going to be the one that finds out where it takes her. Now, the important thing to know about with films is that an external journey always represents an internal journey. And in this case, it's no different. Now, what we're going to look at is this chair. This chair is honestly the best fucking design ever. And I'm going to hopefully, by the time we finish this presentation, you're going to agree with me. Now, the chair is pointed out as being a very important feature in this story for a specific reason, which is that it isn't part of the plans that the alien race sent. In other words, this chair was designed by humans, and it was placed into the design, and it shouldn't be there. And this scene is to describe that fact that it's all about scientific reason having a lack of trust and a lack of faith in this message. Can we play the next scene, please, Tasha?
I just want to go on one more time. Okay, the transmitted spec never said it was a chair or a straining harness or survival here. You know, why can't we just trust the original?
Design is negligible. Bottom line is, we're not putting anybody in this machine unless there's some sort of protection, minimal protection. End of story.
Okay, so thematically, we understand that this chair shouldn't be there, and it's a sign of a lack of faith on the side of the rational scientists. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a scene that maybe some of you have seen before, some of you haven't, but we're going to go through it chunk by chunk, and I'm going to explain how it relates to storytelling in a symbolic way that will hopefully highlight some things that maybe you haven't thought about before when watching a film. So the first thing we're going to do is that this scene, the director needs to show Ellie seeing reason and rationality and science in a new light. She's always been somebody that celebrates reason, but she's about to be shown an environment that she normally celebrates, and it's going to be shown in a light that makes the audience feel there's something wrong. The second thing is that we're now going to show this character stepping into the unknown. She has to step into her own private journey where she has no protection, and she is isolated, and she is going into her own private space. And the third is going to be a leap of faith where Ellie has to make a radical transformation of her views, and there needs to be a symbolic and ritualistic leap in which there is going to be a death and rebirth. Now, death and rebirth is a very important component of storytelling. It's the idea that you cannot demonstrate or show personal transformation unless you show somebody symbolically dying and then being reborn. So this first clip is our journey walking towards this chair, and I'm just going to ask Dasha to play it, and then we'll break down what it means. So this journey, this first initial walk to this chair. All right, there we go. So she's walking towards this chair along a passageway, and she's flanked by two scientists, two assistants. Now, a journey towards a chair that will take you into outer space should look something like this, and we have a lot of those visual identity components inside of that hallway. But this is a death and rebirth scene, so the director is trying to suggest that she's about to be executed, which is why it looks more like this. Now, the symbolic reason of this journey is for her to have a death and rebirth, so the director is putting in the subconscious idea that she's about to be executed. Now, if you look at the costume, and this is not a theory, this has been confirmed by Robert Zemeckis and the costume team. If you look at this outfit here, it's not exactly the normal NASA gear that you would expect for a space journey. And that's because the association of Joan of Arc has been built into it. That she is a martyr, she's going on a journey to discover new ideas, and this is going to put her in risk of dying, because martyrs die for their belief and their faith in something outside of the norm. So the next step is to have her remove herself from being supported by civilization at large. And she now needs to take a step into the unknown. And let's see how Robert Zemeckis shows that symbolically and metaphorically in this next shot. Now, it's really important to keep in mind that nothing in a film made by a master is ever coincidental. Now, if you look at this scene, we have this singular character walking across this gap, and the two assistants don't follow her, which could be coincidental, but it could be that Robert Zemeckis is trying to implant an idea in your mind unconsciously, and that mind would be walking the plank. Now, this character is leaving civilization behind to go on a journey where she is going to die and be reborn as something new. And the idea of the nautical theme of being kicked off of a boat is very, very naturally adaptable to this situation. At the same time, if she's walking across a plank and looking down at these spinning rings, some of the associations are guillotines and circling sharks. She's looking down at something that is extremely threatening to her, and she's extremely scared. Now, theatricality is about building in the idea that we are experiencing what the character is experiencing. And what Zemeckis is doing is building in concepts that make us feel that, even though we're not aware of it. We get our first look at this chair, and a chair that's designed for somebody to go into space doesn't need to look like this. The reason it looks like this is because he's building the association of an electric chair, because this is her symbolic execution. At the same time, you see her get plugged in, and also the container in which she is kept, and there's multiple themes happening here, including the eyeball, but I won't go into that, but it's synonymous with a gas chamber. So what Zemeckis is doing is layering metaphor upon metaphor that operates on a subconscious level. And if we could play the next scene, please, Dasha.
Magnetic restraint is secure. All life support functions are normal.
Roger that. Elliot.
Control. Copy.
Elliot control, reading you 5 by 5.
I'm ready.
Dynamics is confirm the walkway retraction. Got a visual on the door.
I see the escape system is armed.
Door is looking good.
Door alignment looks good.
Can we just take a second to give Dasha a round of applause? Because she's navigating the keyboard up there without any preparation. Go, Dasha. Okay, so costume design. Now, these guys are scientists. Now, scientists generally wear white kind of clothing. They don't wear helmets. So it begs the question, why did Zemeckis put these guys into this specific design of outfit? Well, he wants to gain the association of something that's dangerous. So we've got two guys that are dressed in garbs that not only look like funeral pallbearers, but they're reminiscent of bomb shelter wardens. And bomb shelter wardens come with their own associations of danger and death. But at the same time, the color scheme of these scientists makes no sense unless you look at it metaphorically. We're building in the association of death and danger and negative associations. It's all subconscious association. And if we could play the next clip.
We are at 30%.
Copy that, 30%.
How you doing tonight, Al?
Cat? Is that you?
That's a big affirmative.
Who let you in there, huh?
Higher tolerance, I mean.
Well, I'm glad you came.
So even the use of the language there is reminiscent. Oh, sorry, by the way, one more thing. The door of the when it closes, there's reminiscent ideas of a boulder closing across a cave, plus it's a bank vault. She's kept in something where something very valuable is kept. But the idea of her wearing this headset with this red eyepiece, when was the last time you saw a red lens in any situation? It's the idea of something that makes her a cyborg, because at this point, she's locked into a device that keeps her locked into being rational and reasonable. And what we're about to see in the next few scenes is her making a leap of faith away from hardcore rationality. Also, the chair itself, just take a second to look at that. Does she look like an empowered scientist going on a very good journey? Or does the design look like something that's reminiscent of a chair designed for somebody who's a paraplegic? Why would that be the case? Because her connection to being highly rational is crippling her. These are concepts of metaphors that show that her connection to her current mindset is damaging her well-being. And what we're going to see through the next steps is this leap that takes her away from these metaphors. So the next step is leap of faith. I've actually just played something out of order, but that scene where we just watched, the reason that scene is introduced is that she asks Kent, who let you in there? And he says, a higher power intervened. And it's the idea that we're lacing in the idea that there's something bigger and broader and larger than her. So if we can play the next clip, please. And the chair here becomes a character.
Something's happening.
Sorry, no, it's a reference to God, actually. There's a light.
Something. I can't tell whether it's daylight or not. There it is again. It's coming from the bottom.
65.
The material is changing. It's bordering on translucent. The system's intact. There's got to be some kind of electromagnetic field. Are you reading this?
Negative. We're seeing only interference.
I can't describe it. I can't even explain it.
Okay, my stuff's all out of order now, so that we're winging it. So actually, in this scene, what she's saying is, there's a light, I can't describe it, I can't even explain it. It's the beginning of the process of her explaining that she doesn't exactly know how to scientifically categorize what's happening. And if we can play the next scene.
Initiate drop sequence. On my mark. 10, 9, now dress it. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So she's confronted with a light at the end of a tunnel. She goes through simple stages of going through a red purgatory and then going through the stage, and then she keeps on referring to control, like, control, can you read me? Ellie, I'm good, okay to go, I'm okay to go, I'm okay to go. And now, we've skipped a few things, but now we're going to show Ellie, and this is the important stage where the chair itself becomes a character. It's no longer a static prop, it actually will emote. And we're also going to be reintroduced to the symbol of the compass, which is her connection to faith in something other than science. So if we can play the next clip. All right, so the chair suddenly becomes a part of her personality when she detaches from it. So it's the part of herself she doesn't want to let go of, or it's the part that doesn't want to be let go of. So it starts to emote itself as a clutching hand. It starts to emote as something throwing a tantrum, because these are emotional concepts being displayed psychologically. It's something that's showing aggression at being left behind, which is what every single one of us feels when we have to let go of something that we're connected to. The idea of a great storytelling is to take the abstract concepts of emotions and psychological transformation and to display them in a way that is metaphorically understandable. That's what great storytellers are grasping when they make you feel something for a scene that is apparently about something disconnected from you. So the next scene we see in a dreamlike state, Ellie is descended upon this abstract dreamlike beach in a fetal position, where she is reunited with her father, who is the alien race manifesting itself as the embodiment of something she cares about. And then she's returned to Earth with no evidence whatsoever of her experience, and she becomes a more wholesome and more fulfilled person. So she goes from being this scientific rationalist to being someone emotional and fulfilled and feeling much more at home in her own skin. So storytelling is the transformation of showing characters that are locked in a certain state and then showing them transform into something that's beyond, and that happens through metaphor. So what happens in this story? It's the transformation of the balance between reason and faith, which is faith not in the religious sense, but in the sense of spirituality. There doesn't need to be an ideological or religious tense to that. So what I wanted to kind of talk about today is that even a chair, which is just a fucking object, can have a really serious meaning. And that's why I love this guy. So I hope that was interesting and useful, and maybe it's applicable to something that you do in your own lives in terms of storytelling and design. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend reading more stuff by a guy called Joseph Campbell, who describes the importance of metaphors using a thing called the monomyth, which is an idea that every human mind needs to go through transformations. So thank you. And thank you, Dasha.
Mike. Thanks, man. I got my own. We're going to keep on rolling. Thanks for sticking with us through all the technical difficulties, everyone. So is Ash on deck? He is. So as we careen on through other worlds, the headlights of our Akira bikes streak in the rain, and our interplanetary satellites drop below the event horizon. Ash Thorp is riding shotgun through his world of digital dreams and pixel-projected imaginaries. In biology, we use the term nondescript to catalog an animal that doesn't fit into traditional classification systems. And in many ways, Ash is just such a nondescript beast. Part director, part animator, part concept designer, conjuring imaginaries for films such as Ghost in the Shell, Assassin's Creed, or Captain Marvel. But for tonight, he'll be focusing on his own work and developing a storyline through his own process and his personal films that continue to break the internet as we speak. Ash will be presenting his work on stage here in just a second, but then we're going to finish the evening with him talking through a series of his short films that we're going to project on the mega screen over there. So after his talk, please don't run away. Please don't disappear into the bar or to the rooftop, but hang tight, wrap yourself in blankets, because we're going to be drifting through Ash's digital worlds on the big screen with him in just a little bit. But for now, let's welcome to him the stage, Ash Thorp.
All right, thank you so much. It's my first time in Russia, so it's been really awesome. The weather's been great, aside from the rain, but it's been awesome. So thank you so much for all being here and for showing up through the weather, so it's been awesome. So yeah, my name's Ash Thorp. I work and I live in San Diego, California. I've been working in the film industry for about 8 or 9 years now. I primarily work as a designer, but I kind of slowly evolved into directing more. I'm going to talk a bit about my process. Every time I do these talks, it's really important for me to kind of exchange ideas and make sure that that I'm not just showing my work, but at the same time kind of giving you tools to kind of educate yourself and get better at what it is that you're doing. So my talk is called Be Prolific. And if you're not familiar with who I am, I have a show reel that's going to kind of explain via reel what I do. So let's see if this works. And
as a child, I would sit and wonder, escaping my body and this shared reality called the human existence. Each day I begin with an open dialogue to that child in hopes of losing myself in what I call the alternate mind. Through the years I lose touch with that child from my earlier life. In this dimension I am able to alter time and space. This is my true existing state, a state of omnipotent flow. That inner dialogue caught between reality and another dimension, existing through time and space. That is where I gather what you see here today, and present to you as me, myself, pure and defined.
Yeah, thank you so much. Haha. Yeah. Yeah, that's my, basically, I was kind of fighting the idea of doing a reel for such a long time because I didn't like the idea of presenting all my work so compacted, but that was more or less an experiment to kind of express who I am and what I do and why I do it, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So let's see, what's the next slide here? So here's some main kind of coverage that I'm gonna focus on today. Number one is gonna be my tools. It's a common question I get asked all the time. Which is valid. What tools do I use? So I'm going to go into deep detail about what tools I use and why. I'm also going to talk about my thoughts on creative block. It seems to be a common question amongst most creatives as to like how can I, beat this this dark master that kind of controls me and ruins my life by creative block. So I have some strategies and techniques as to how I beat it. So I'm going to help you guys with that. Number three is my process of how I do the work that I do based on lists and all that kind of stuff, so I'm going to go into deep dive on that. Number four is focus. I'm going to talk a bit about how important it is to have focus as a creative and how important it is to have that in your career and how it's helped me a lot. And the resources, talk a little bit about books that I read and why I read them. And then number six is going to be about some rules that I follow. All right, this is pretty good. This Bluetooth is pretty awesome. So first topic is tools, and let's talk a bit about tools. So as of now, these are most of the tools that I frequent on a daily basis. Perhaps when I started working in this industry, I would just work I would only use Photoshop, but now I use quite an array of different programs. And the reason I use so many different programs is because I'm so curious about why certain things work. So I'm always like, oh, well, how does this work? How does 3D work? How is this? So it kind of accumulated into this kind of amassed blob of programs. I use, for those of you who care or wonder, I don't use PC or Mac. I use them both, and it doesn't matter. It's all just a tool. It's all just something to help us express who we are. So I don't care about brands. I just want to get the job done. So here's some essential programs and why I use them and what I use them for. Number one is Cinema 4D is what I do for 3D modeling and 3D building and everything. So everything that you see of my work that is in 3D, I use a program called Cinema 4D. I'm not brand loyal to this. It just happens to be the program that I fell into. I started working at a studio called Prologue in my beginning, and it was more or less a kind of a motion graphics title sequence place. How many of you are familiar with Prologue's work? They did 7 title sequence. Have you seen 7? Kyle Cooper made that. He's amazing. So, but anyways, it was kind of like a common program that I fell into. So I didn't get introduced to Maya or 3D Studio Max, which seems to be like the common program. But Cinema is really amazing. It's very robust. If you use it, you know what I mean by it. It's an awesome program. Number 2 is After Effects, and I use that primarily for 2D animation, compositing, and doing like effects. So all my renders will go through After Effects primarily, and I just have like a slew of like little tricks that I use with it over the time of all the years that I've been using it. I kind of figured out why and what things work from using that program. Number 3, all my editing, I go and use Premiere. Sometimes Premiere drives me nuts. I'm sure if you use Premiere, you're very familiar with it. But Premiere is amazing. It's actually, when it works, it's really incredible, and that's basically how I do all my editing. I do my play blast and all that kind of stuff. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Illustrator is where I create all my vector illustrations. I've been using Illustrator and Photoshop since like, I'm aging myself here. I've been using it since like 2000 or something like that. So I've been using it for a long time. And it hasn't changed all that much over the time that I've used it, but anytime I do like primary like illustration or design stuff, I usually use Illustrator. It's really great. It's a great program. Number 6, for all digital art and sketching, drawing, and designing, I use Photoshop. Photoshop's been just like, a staple, so it's an awesome program when it works again. And then InDesign is where I do all my editorial and presentation stuff, although this presentation is made in Keynote, so it's slightly different. Number 7 is Bridge. I love Bridge. Bridge is kind of a way that I use. I kind of use it as a way to kind of oversee and see everything that I am working on very easily. It just gives me a sense of what it is that I'm doing and what I'm lacking in. It's just a great program. It's very simple, but it works really great. I use Chrome, obviously. Chrome, the reason why I use Chrome is because they have a lot of really great assets that add to it. It's like communication and research and project management. I use Docs and sheets and all that kind of stuff. It's just really great. For audio stuff, I use Adobe Audition. It sounds like I'm like a sponsor. I'm sponsored by Adobe, but I'm not, I swear. It's just a really good suite of programs. And then ZBrush, as frustrating as ZBrush has become and how much I've yelled at my screen while using it, it's an amazing program. Once you understand how to speak its language, it's just like the best. And I use it primarily for soft body modeling, but you can do hard surface Boolean operations. It's really quite great. And then Lightroom, I take a lot of photographs. It's kind of a hobby of mine, and I love taking photographs, and I use Lightroom to edit all my photographs. And then lastly, Dropbox, primarily for production and sharing and doing all my backups and stuff like that. It's been really good. I've been using it since its beginning. Okay, so do tools matter? And I think that, in my mind, no tool is really perfect. And I really believe that it's up to us as the user to bend and use these tools to kind of work for what we want and what we need out of them. So that being said, there's tools, all these tools, I'm never happy with any of them. Every program I curse every time I use it, because I'm like, what the heck, why can't it just like do that thing I needed to do? So, but it's important to not get kind of fixated on, I'm only a Mac guy or I'm only a PC guy, because I used to be that person, and it kind of hindered me. It hindered me in my career because I would just kind of latch onto a brand. So tools matter, but for me, they're not the end result. So a question I get asked a lot is, what tools should you use? And I think that one of the things that I do is, it all depends on your goals as a creative. So the thing that I do is I'll look online and I'll look at like peers and people that I admire. And if they're cool enough, I'll write to them and I'll say like, hey, how did you do that? And would you mind sharing some details as to what program you used and why? And for the most part, most creative people, if you like use complete sentences and spell your words properly and you're nice, like they'll respond and they'll give you the information that you want, which is really great. So that's how I would decide what tools to use. So those are some tools and some essentials. I'm going to talk a little bit about a tribute that I did with my friend Mike. Mike and I are big fans of Akira. How many of you have seen Akira? Yes, you guys are awesome. So if you didn't raise your hand, you're not my kind of people. I'm just joking. You should watch it. It's really awesome. It was a film that I watched when I was really young, and it was like a seminal kind of, it changed my life. Growing up in America, we would see animations kind of like Disney, which is really great, but I'd never seen brutal violence and things that I was really curious about as a kid. And Akira had these amazing, just everything is amazing. So growing up, I wanted to do a tribute to it. And the reason why I do these tributes is basically because when I'm growing up and I'm watching these things, I'm wondering what it is, why do I love this so much, and what kind of attributes it's giving me? Why do I love these things? So I basically would use this as like a tool to analyze, and instead of analyzing it on paper, I would basically decipher it by making the art in my own vision through the process of analyzing it. So Awaken Akira is one of those. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools. We're going to talk about this a little later once we do the screen, but I'll share it now just so you can get some reference, and to those that might not know what this is. So this is a tribute to Akira. Thank you so much. Believe it or not, that's like only a minute, and it took a year to make. It totally sucks about the things that we do. And the reason why it took so long is because I also have a full-time job, and I have a family and a lot of things going on in my life. But this project in itself was just so involving, and everything had to be recreated from scratch, so we couldn't just buy models and things. So, but here's some primary programs that we use. As I mentioned earlier, everything went through Cinema 4D, which is our 3D program, and Mike and I both use that frequently. All the renders and everything went through After Effects, is where we did all the grading and the compositing and all the extra kind of stuff, all the good juicy stuff. We used Premiere for editing. We did, in the original edit that we did like a 4-minute render, or 4-minute edit, and we realized that we were gonna die and it wasn't gonna get done, so we cut it down quite a bit, so we used Premiere to do so. Fusion 360, are any of you familiar with Fusion 360 as a program? All right, awesome. It's a free program for students or teachers, I think, which is great. And I really hate poly modeling. It's like some kind of weird origami thing that I can't get my head around. So Fusion 360 kind of spoke to me because I've been using Illustrator for such a long time. It's very connected to vector kind of pipeline. So I used Fusion 360 for modeling everything that was in there primarily. I did some poly modeling. And then we use ZBrush. I'll show some stuff from ZBrush, why we use ZBrush. We use Photoshop. The longer I go into my career, the less I use Photoshop, which is odd. I use primarily 3D stuff more than ever. Marvelous Designer we used for creating cloth simulation stuff and pieces and bits and pieces. And then Illustrator at the end for making some kind of title stuff. So these are primarily the ingredients for making New Awakening Kira. And the reason why I wanted to show you tools is for this purpose directly. And here is a direct example of one of the frames that we had created. So this is a still from the original anime. And I don't want to spoil anything, so any of you that haven't watched it, you should definitely check it out. But this is a still from a machine that basically holds one of the main characters in like a cryo state, basically. And it was one of the things that I thought would be really great to recreate, and Mike and I both really loved the idea of recreating this prop. So this is how it works. So this is, that's the screen. I basically kind of flatten it out so I can get it as flat as possible, and I brought it in. This is a user interface that comes from Fusion 360. So basically taking all the line art and breaking it down into vectors that then we would extrude and kind of make geometric math out of, basically. And it's, yeah, I just put on like really crazy metal music and go like super OCD for hours, and then, yeah, this just kind of comes along. Hours later, once everything kind of comes together, we take all that geometry and then we bring it into Cinema 4D. If you haven't used Cinema 4D, this is what the basic user interface looks like, kind of. And then this is kind of what we have here is on the top left, we have the viewport, and below that we have materials that we would make. And then on the lower right is a render engine. It's a rendering plugin called Octane. Are you familiar with Octane? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's kind of a new thing, a new technology. It's GPU-based real-time rendering, which is great, and the GI is awesome. It's really great. And it was kind of a revolutionary thing for myself and like the CGI community. So when you make something and you add something to it, it affects it real time. So you can kind of see what you're doing really quickly, which is great. And this is kind of how the rest of the project was kind of built and constructed, which is taking the model, bringing it in here, and then adding materials and kind of customizing it till it kind of matched the source material. Let's get kind of granular here. So, and this is why I love these passion projects and why I really encourage everybody to do them, because before this, I didn't realize how far I had to fall into this rabbit hole to get the results that I wanted. So every button on that thing has to have a bespoke custom material, and I had to study kind of how the properties and the light infractions and like the just how light transmits through plastic itself and edge wear and all these kinds of things. So I had to go like, Mike and I went really deep down into this, and the great thing is we kind of learned about, well, plastic and CGI, which just seems stupid, but it's actually really important because all these things, these little details all add up to the sum of the total, and it makes things kind of have an essence of reality, which is, to me, all that matters. So we kind of figured out this is one of the buttons on there, and there's like, I don't know, like 400 buttons or something. Once you have a custom piece, you can kind of add it and change the diffuse and all that kind of stuff. But so there's a button, and this is kind of closer down in the pipeline. So once we have like all the general geometry and we have the custom like diffuse and all the materials, we add them all to different pieces. Again, lots of late nights and OCD, a lot of metal music and screaming in my ear. And then we're done. As we kind of figured it out, we also animate it. But this is a look before. This is our rendition. And obviously there's a shift because the other one is drawn by hand. So there's imperfections on just the perfection of it. And then here's the original source material. So, and to me, it was really important because to match it as close as possible, because we didn't want to just make our own version. We wanted to kind of pay homage to a masterpiece in my mind. So here's some miscellaneous pieces in the opening scene, which is incredibly iconic and is probably one of my favorite scenes in animation. They're going through this city, and there's these really beautiful parallax scenes that happen. And so this is a viewport, a view of my viewport inside a Cinema 4D. And this is what the original, the anime looks like, which is great. It's these paintings on different places of glass, and they're all kind of parallaxly moving, which is amazing. And then here is a look at, these are like weird details. It's kind of like I'm showing you all like my garbage, but it's part of the process. So this is a look at Cinema 4D, not Cinema, sorry, ZBrush, and we're taking like basic geometry and adding a lot of imperfections so that it kind of has this like look of decay. And this kind of stuff is really hard to achieve unless you're using a program kind of like ZBrush, for example. And these are like little bits and pieces. I don't know how many of you use After Effects? Okay, awesome. Yeah, a good amount. This is some of the layers. So this is the actual, this is not the whole film. If you look on the right, there's more to it. But inside there's like another pre-comp that looks the same. And then there's like pre-comps inside of pre-comps. It gets really crazy, but yeah, I don't know. When I show these things, I'm doing like a self-analysis on myself, like what's wrong with me? I like have problems. This is a look at the geometry that I modeled from Fusion 360 that was then brought into Cinema, and all the details and bits and pieces. And one of the cool things is there's a lot of good source material on the subject, and using these kind of like as relics and bringing these 2D animations into 3D. And then this is the render from that, all the 3D. We created all the materials and the lighting and everything. And then this is what the source is. This is the source material. So there's the back to the render. And we changed things. We had to change some of the lighting and stuff just so it would kind of effectively work in the edit. But then here's the source material. The other thing that I'm just going to show this, I'm going to let this play. One of the things that I was really keen on figuring out how to do, which is showing Tetsuo's transformation. I'm not going to ruin it for those of you who haven't watched it because there's a lot of hands that didn't get raised. Shame on you. I'm not going to shame you publicly, but you should be shamed. No. But anyways, there's a transformation that happens in one of the characters, and I didn't want to necessarily go into like Houdini sims and all that kind of stuff. So I was looking into microscopic, really high-res speed photography of fluid dynamics, and the most interesting things that you wouldn't imagine, like soap spreading over milk with light behind it, creates these incredible. This is right now what you're looking at is red footage shot at 120 frames per second, I believe, or 240, I think, at 8K res. This one too, all of this stuff that you're seeing, it's slow-mo versions of like these really beautiful explosions that are happening microscopically with light underneath it. And it really helped us because I didn't want to create all this in CGI, so it was really another really cool adventure to take on these projects, because I never had thought that, oh, I'm going to do a Kira thing and then I'm going to go and like film this stuff. And it's just really, it's just part of the journey that's really amazing, and something I love about doing these projects, because for me, I'm not a really religious person, and when I was doing this, it was kind of like I was looking at whatever we would think of as God. It would just kind of like open my eyes to the magnitude of beauty and art that's created that we don't even realize and see. Like on the ground, there's probably this is probably happening on the ground right there, but we can't see it because we're not looking for it. But I don't know, it's just, for me, it was like this epiphany. And this is me and my friend Kevin and Rebecca Jolson. They are, I've worked with them a lot. They're my DOPs on a lot of my projects, and we're working at their home studio, and that's the red camera with a bunch of monitors. and we have a bunch of like ink, and we literally just played around, and we're like, wow, like we were on drugs all day, but we weren't. We're like, oh, cool, put the red there, and blow on it over there. Oh, wow. So it was just us being really like nerdy and having a lot of fun. And who would have thought that like you need peanuts and like Clorox bleach and like toilet cleaner things and all kinds of weird stuff and soap. But the thing that made the most interesting reactions was things that I would never have thought to combine, which is really cool. Here's another look at the setup and the camera itself. And it was such a fun day. For me, it's like, it has such a good memory, and it's something that I always enjoy, and it's like another reason why. So aside from tools, these are like another part of the adventure that we really enjoyed. So, okay, let's talk about creative block. It's a myth. It's totally a myth. Don't believe in it. Don't believe the hype. It's totally a myth. And this is how and why I believe that creative block is a myth. So, and these are some of the things that I've done to beat it. So number one is number one thing that I do is I work on 2 to 3 projects at the same time. And here's why I do that. In the beginning, I used to think, oh, I should just work on one project and just stick on that. But for me, I don't know if you're the same as I am, I imagine most of us are, is that you get like burnt out on an idea or you hit a wall. And having multiple projects to work on really helps you kind of navigate and shift your mind. The way that my mind works is I'll hit a problem and then I'll shift to another project. My mind will be opened up from that problem and I'll be working on something else. Still productive, still feel good about myself. By the time I come back to the problem, my mind, the neurological, I don't know, whatever, the weaves or whatever is happening in my brain resets to it, and I'm able to solve it faster because I haven't overworked my mind on something that doesn't make sense, and I've allowed myself to also feel like creatively happy by working on another project. So that's number one. Number two is really knowing when to take a break. I'm incredibly stubborn. I don't like to let things get to me, but I've realized over time that taking breaks has helped me a lot because it allows me to kind of have a separation from things emotionally so I can come back to it and really focus on it. Number three is having strong networks of peers. I can't stress number three enough is I love having like a really strong group of friends that are better than me at what I do. And I like to defer to them whenever I'm having, not a block, but just having like a hard time kind of expressing myself through my films or whatever I'm making. So having them as like a soundboard or somebody that I can connect with really helps. Number four is an obvious one, which is I try to avoid like bad rituals and habits. And you know you're in a bad habit when you just feel unhappy. You know, the moment that you feel unhappy or unfulfilled is usually because you've created a bad habit for yourself and you're just continuing that bad habit. And number five is just simply getting the work done. So much of what it is about beating the habit is basically like sticking to it and just getting it done. So whether you're working on multiple projects, you just have to sit there and get through it. And by the time you come back to it, usually for me at least, it's beat it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Epoch and how I kind of navigated a little bit of creative block in that process. So inside of, there's a short film that I made called Epoch, and it's basically, I made it with my friend Chris Beyer. And Chris and I, for me, it's like my love note to space and my love of space. As a child, I grew up, I really wanted to be an astronaut. And I'm just a nerdy artist, and I never managed to figure that out. So now I'm an artist, but I can still travel there via my computer. So there's this thing that we wanted to create, which is a vessel. Inside of Epoch, there's a lot of different kind of metaphors and things, but it's basically a journey from Earth through our solar system out into the unknown. And we needed to take this journey on a vessel, basically. And so originally I had thought of like this kind of transforming fractal-esque kind of ship that would shift and change throughout different scenes because we needed to tell no dialogue. We had to tell it through the visuals alone. So this is some of like really rough first versions, and we also thought maybe it could be a ring. And the reason why we thought it could be a ring because like time and the way that time works as a loop, it could be something interesting. But I was like, it looks like Lord of the Rings in space. I don't want to do that. So we ultimately ended up on this design. And this came to me, again, because I was working on multiple projects. I had shifted my mind to another project, and by the time I came back, I was sitting in my 3D program. And if you work in 3D, there's like this little I think it's like I forget what it's called, like the little navigator. My mind's it's like a Gidget or something like that. What is it? Gizmo. Yes, yeah, thank you. Gizmo, thank you. So there's a gizmo, and it tells you your z depth, your x depth, and your y, and those coordinates. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, well, this film is made inside of my computer, and I sometimes think that maybe we're in a simulation because I believe in the metaverse. So I was thinking, oh, this would be really interesting if I designed the ship off of the idea that we are in a simulation, and I'm making it inside of my computer simulation. So I was looking at the gizmo as a design. So if you look at the ship, it's actually the same coordinates and design of the gizmo inside of 3D space, which helps you kind of navigate through it. And I love the idea of having these multiple layers of depth and metaphors for it. Another thing that really inspired me since the beginning of the film was analyzing diagrams of atoms. And in the atoms, the way the electrons would navigate and shift around the neuron, or the center, the nucleus in the center. So that was kind of looking at diagrams of atoms was really interesting to me, because I was thinking about the distance and the size and scale of things. So the ship was designed on those kind of ideas and stuff. And for me, it was like an aha moment. I was like, oh, this fits perfectly for everything that we need. Another thing that really kind of lended to an interesting adventure with this ship is that it would be able to convey different things inside the story without a narration, because we are naturally, as humans, we're naturally prone to looking at symbols and digesting what those symbols are telling us. So an X is naturally something of danger or something that's bad, but a plus sign is actually something good. And so in certain scenes, the ship would take different types of forms or would realign. If you sit and watch, we're going to go over the films and we're going to break them down further. But this was a part of the ship that I thought was really interesting. So not only did it become like this multi-axis dimensional space thing, but at the same time, it could take the form of a plus or an X, which also helps with the narrative. So it all kind of connected. And this is a detail for those of you who want to know the details of this. This was textured horribly using Photoshop, modeled with Fusion 360. And then this was rendered using Redshift, which is the renderer that I use currently. It's a GPU-based renderer, but yeah. And then I'm going to show just a little bit of Epoch 2, which has the ship, and you're going to see inside the ship, and you're going to see outside of it. But yeah, so here you go. Thank you. Thank you so much. So that's Epoch 2, and that's some of the creative block and the ways that I navigated to get over it. Let's talk a bit about lists. If there's anything in this presentation that I really hope that you take is going to be this part and why I use lists. This is something that I run through my mind all the time. The moment in my life that I was able to take like responsibility for myself and my actions, it made me feel like I had fulfillment in my life. So one thing I think about is personal accountability. Accountability is our greatest asset. And here's why and how I do and why I use lists. So lists are really important. I use them to kind of decipher what my priorities are in my life, and this is how I kind of decipher that. In your life, you have so many different distractions. You have so many different people asking for your time. You have so many different things that you would like to do. But the most important thing is to understand what it is that you value most and finding that purpose through your priorities. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. So with my list is basically the process that I would kind of suggest to you that if you're new to trying this thing is first and foremost is to write all of the things that you want to do or you're interested in or your dreams or the things that you must do on a day-to-day basis. Let's say you're a student, so you have to go to school and focus on your school, or if let's say you're a parent, well, you have to take care of your kid and your child or your job. Write everything out. Number two is I try to remove as much clutter as possible to my life. I try not to ever do things now that I don't feel like are important to me or going to be something that I find fulfilling. And that can consist of just not replying to certain emails or doing meetings that I don't want to do. I've left companies. I've kind of declined on a lot of things because I wasn't feeling like it was a priority. That felt like more of a distraction to me. Number three is finding your A and B list priorities. And so what I mean by that is you need to break down, like, number one is your A-list priorities. These are things that if you don't do, it's going to affect your life in a negative way. So it's like not if you don't pay the rent or if you don't take your child to school or any of these things, or if you don't send an email to a really important client or if you don't cash your checks or whatever. These are all things that you must do. That's your top level things. Anything that if you don't do it, it could cause you like direct harm. And then your B-list things are things that if you don't do, it could cause you a little bit of issues, but you can still, navigate them and work through them. But I only do in my life. When I first started doing this, I had like all these weird things that became important to me that were just distractions. And the moment that I just removed all that crap from my life, like my life became so much clearer and better, and my vision for my future and my passions became so much stronger because of that. So I was able to remove all the clutter, and I only do those A and B list things when I'm home and I'm working. I only focus on those things, and I'm able to get so much more done because my mind is clear. I know what I need to do, and I only focus on the things that matter. It sounds simple when I say it, but the moment that I really started to live through it and become it, I became to be more prolific necessarily. So I was able to do like 10 times the amount of work that I did normally because I was so distracted by C-list priorities or D-list priorities, things that didn't matter. The next thing I would do is I would write out all my goals in order of action. So it's really important that you write out everything that you want to do, but you make an action, almost like you're reading a book. You would have the first start and the middle and the end. You would do the same thing for yourself and your actions, because what you're doing at this process, at least the way I do it, is I'm writing my own book of the reality in which I want to have in my life. Number 5 is I set times and alarms to keep myself on track. I mean, there's so many of us that I'm sure that when we create things, we get so lost in time that and that's a testament to how great it is to be who we are as creatives, is that hours can go by and we're not aware of what it is that we're doing because we're just focusing on the creative task. But I set a lot of alarms on my phone to kind of keep me on track to stick to the reality in which everybody else on this planet works with, which is on the 24-hour schedule. But this kind of works a lot because it allows me to be really specific about how I do the things I do. And then lastly is execute your tasks and stuff. So this is a look at, I use a lot of these like moleskins. Some of these, I have 2 sketchbooks that I bring, or 2 books that I use, especially when I'm working. One of them is what I would call like I guess I would call it like my priority book. It's like a book that I only put my list of things to do. And then the other books are like my sketchbooks. It's just kind of where I draw all kinds of random stuff and I solve problems. And so I always have 2 books. And this is like a look at my book right here. And this is my day-to-day book. And I always make a list. On Sunday nights, I make the week goals. And then on every night before I start my day, I always write out basically how I want to conduct my day and how I'm going to go through it. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 6 days right here that you're looking at. So if we look at the top left, we have basically one or two words that describe the action that I need to take, and then next to that is a box. I always create these little boxes, bless you, and then I have a time next to it on the right that pertains to when I need to take care of that action. So, and the reason why I use paper, because I've had this question like, oh, Ash, why don't you use like frickin' Google McDougal, the app that's the coolest thing or whatever. None of that shit works for me, because in the digital space, things don't have a physical meaning, and I use paper and I use a pen because it has gravity to it. And when I finish a task, a tough task, always my toughest task is the first one in the day. When I finish that task, when I cross that out, I feel so fulfilled that I've used the time to fulfill and get the things that I wanted done. And so that's kind of how I work. It seems kind of simple, and the reason why, another thing I want to touch on is the reason why I make my list the night before is because cognitively, I might have a really tough problem. Let's say like a client has hired me to solve a very difficult design need. But if I have it in my mind that I know I'm going to work on this the next day, I will kind of meditate on it, and I'll think about it, and I'll run through the process of designing it in my mind through my sleep. So when I come to the task at hand in the morning, I've already had a head start cognitively, so when I'm ready to hit it, I already am accomplishing it mentally, and it's sped up my ability to get to the direct source really quickly. And check out these bookmarks. Yeah, I got the sweetest bookmarks. Yeah, you have to have really sweet bookmarks. That's awesome, you're clapping for the bookmark. I got them from like a dollar store, it's awesome. This is a bunch of my books. So not only is it in my sketchbook and stuff, but it's also in Google Docs, as I mentioned earlier. And here's a quick example of, this is all of Awaken Akira, the film itself. These are the countable films, are all the shots on the left. And then everything this is mid-production, so Mike and I would use this as like a production Bible. When you do these projects, you have to basically do everything. So we would also be like producers and stuff as well. So on the stuff that's in green is stuff that we had finished, and then all the stuff in red is which we didn't get done. And trust me, at the end of the year, I fucking hated the color red because it was so horrible. This is a very difficult project to achieve, but I'm glad we're done with it. So we would kind of, in the beginning, we have a mood edit, and then we have like references to support the shots, and then we'd have like a modeling phase, and then like a scene assembly phase, and then we'd have a hardware render phase, and then we'd do another edit and a touch on the edit, then we'd do another model pass, and then the shading pass, which is the materials, and then we would do grading, lighting, posts, and then we'd do renders, and then once the renders were done, we would put it all together, and then we'd be done. And so this is another look at how lists work and why I use lists, and the only way that I'm able to get anything done is by using these kind of things that allow me to be responsible for the things that I need to get done. Okay, so focus, super important. Your level of focus in life is a direct result to your ability to manage your time appropriately. It's common sense, but it's like something that I've always had a trouble with before I kind of really focused on why it is that I wasn't able to maintain my focus. Now more than ever, because there's so many distractions in our lives, you know, Instagram and like really cute like corgi videos online and stuff like that that suck hours of my time. But yeah, so this is focus. Number one rule of focus that I find is really important is basically I try to remove as many distractions on my phone. I stop using Facebook. I have Twitter only on my computer. I have Instagram only on my phone, but I try not to use it too much. I try to give Instagram like maybe 15, 20 minutes of my day max, which is really kind of difficult because it's quite addicting and how the algorithm works, and I feel like, yeah, I want more stuff, but it's actually more or less a distraction, and it gets in the way of me doing the things that I need to do. On my computers, I have 3 computers. I have 2 like gnarly beast PCs that are like my render and my kind of like my big tools that I use, and I also have an iMac. But I don't have any games on there. I know probably, I've heard like my friends that are gamers, they're like, oh my God, you have all these GPUs. You could play like League of Legends, 4,025 million, and you could kill all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do that. I treat my computers as like devices of mechanisms that I get my work done. So I remove all distractions on there. And then I also, I allow small windows of time for breaks and rewards. So if you have a hard time with your focus, it's good to have little windows. So it's every 2 hours or something, if you need a little break, you can have that and give it to yourself. Number 4 is I set up a system of guidelines for my own workflow. And what I mean by that is I kind of have a system as to how I get my things done, as you seen before, but it helps me with my focus so I can kind of know that, okay, well, at 12 o'clock I have to get this done, so I have to remain focused so that I can have a reward after. It's like a way that I kind of fix my brain so I can work really hard, but at the same time enjoy like my breaks and my ability to focus on things so I have like awards basically. And then lastly is it all comes down to like respecting yourself and respecting your time. For me at least, that's helped me with my focus. Resources, super important. I have a bunch of books at home. My office is not that big actually. It's like maybe the size of this stage. And I have a big desk and I have a bunch of books and I love books. Books are so important. I kind of consider them time machines almost in the sense because there's this like proverb from the Bible, I believe, but it's a saying that I always think about, which is iron sharpens iron. And the thing that I love about books is somebody has already taken the time of their life to dedicate to this information, and I'm able to access it at any time through the voyage of reading a book, and I'm able to take their words and apply it to my life, and I just love that. It's one of my favorite things, and I'm constantly always reading, and I love books. And so these are some of the resources that like I totally hope that you're writing these down or memorizing them or take your cell phone out and take a picture of them because these books are so good. And if anything that I've mentioned here in this show, or if you've seen my art and you're wondering how I do it, a lot of it's attributed to the books and the knowledge that I've obtained from these books. So if you take anything from this talk, I hope that you read these books. Number one is a book that everybody asks me, like, what's the top book that you would refer to people to get? Sorry, I'll step out of the way so you can take a picture. Number one is a book called Mastery. And it's actually a book that I've read maybe 3 times and I've listened to often. I'll just kind of listen to maybe like a couple chapters. But Mastery is really amazing. And Mastery is written by a guy named Robert Greene. And he really breaks down and dissects as a human what it is to master. And I put this in quotes because I firmly believe that nobody can actually master art. Art is an unobtainable mastery object. We could just get better at it every day. But he really breaks down like people like Benjamin Franklin and Da Vinci and all these kind of people, like how is they manage to get their mastery through their lives. And he breaks down the 10,000 hour rule or the 10-year rule, and a lot of things that were abstract in my mind became totally true by reading this book, and it's just an amazing book. Number 2 is a book called Eat That Frog. Horrible title, but super good book. Everything that you saw on my list that I kind of was like talking about, it comes from this book called Eat That Frog. And Eat That Frog is all about breaking down how you process your day and how to understand your priorities and how to set up lists. Super good book. Next to that is War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. How many of you deal with procrastination in your life with your art and your creativity? Come on, be honest. It's got to be, everybody has to, right? Procrastinate. There's like, I don't want to do that right now, right? So when I was growing up, I had a real hard time with understanding, like, how am I going to be professional? How am I going to do this stuff? How am I going to work on these movies that I want to work on? Because I would always procrastinate. I would always think, oh, I'll just do it later. I'll do it tomorrow. And when I read Stephen's book, it really I understand how to personify the idea of procrastination within my mind, and it helped me really process all these kind of outer abstract thoughts that I had and things that would get in my way and get in the way of my success. And so that book's really great for that. Damn Good Advice for People with Talent is by George Lois. Awesome book. Yeah, it's just a really easy read, but he's got a lot of great knowledge that he breaks into that book. And then lastly is Manage Your Day-to-Day by 99U, which is kind of a culmination of all these books into one. It's a great book, though. A lot of resources, a lot of great things, a lot of great knowledge. If you have curiosity about how I do what I do, how I work on these movies, why I make my passion projects, it really comes from a lot of the knowledge that I've obtained in these 5 books. So if you're really serious about this stuff, read these books. These are some of my rules. I always surround myself with people that empower me. It's so important. There's so many people on this planet that are going to be like, ah, you fucking suck, and I don't believe in you, and you should stop doing what you do. But those people, just remove them from your life and just only have people around you that empower you, that give you power, give you energy, positive energy. Not people that will just say yes to you, but they'll question you and they'll challenge you, but they'll also empower you. So number 1 is as I surround myself with a really great, healthy group of peers that help me out. It's a tough thing to do because you need to really navigate and find a lot of people that you're going to connect with you, but I'm blessed to have a lot of great people around me. Number two is it's really important to me, and I've seen it, it's kind of the downfall from a lot of people, is always staying humble. It's very important, and it's something that's easy to get lost when you get better at something, or all the world's telling you, oh, you're great, and this and that. But none of that matters, and it's all about being humble, because we're always students to art. Art is always a thing that we're always trying to understand every day, and that's basically us understanding ourselves. So staying humble is really important. Number three is always being creative and always creating. For me, my purpose in life is what I create. Everything that I do in my life is directed towards my passions of creating things. And so for me, that's like a really important rule for me, always to be creating. And then always be learning. I've known a lot of creative people that kind of just stopped learning, and I never understood that. Why would you stop learning? Because learning is feeding your creativity, and your creativity is feeding your learning, and it's all connected. So these are really important things that I'm constantly doing. And it's, I get it, it's really humbling to be sitting on a YouTube video, like learning from a 10-year-old in the UK about how to use Cinema 4D, but it is the process in which I have to do it. So it's just a part of it. And then number 5 is helping others whenever possible, and it's so important. And I think it's always very possible to always help people, so it's a very important part. And then it's always about being powerful and prolific. If you listen to my podcast, that's how I end on my podcast. I'm almost done here. I'm going to show you a teaser to my next project. It's going to take like probably 1.5 years or 2 years, and it's a tribute to something that I really love, and it's something that's very dear to my heart, and something that's kind of changed and shaped my life growing up. So I'm going to play that, and then we're going to be done. Let's see. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'll come back on stage. We'll say goodbye. Yeah. And we're going to do Q&A too, so thank you. Okay, here it is.
Войну. Гранд-адмирал
Yeah, Star Wars. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm making that with my friend Olaf and a bunch of friends. My friend Errolson from Acronym. It's going to be really amazing. We'll talk about that probably in the Q&A here in a minute. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Amazing. You guys are amazing. It's raining. You guys are here. You guys are awesome. So thank you. Yeah, awesome. Spettival. Spettival. What's up? Oh, you guys are too kind. Thank you so much.
Please stick around. We're about to just have a short conversation. We're going to get Mike and Ash up on stage together, and you'll have a quick moment to ask these guys some questions as well. Mike, get up on stage, mate. And then also, please don't go away. Don't forget, Ash is going to come back on stage with us. And we're going to talk through a whole range of his short films as we screen them tonight. So the evening is still young. All these people getting up and walking out. I'm going to hunt you down. I'm going to find you. Look, I can see you. I can see it. Wrong way. It's that way. All right, guys, let's give a big round of applause again to Mike and Ash for an extraordinarily generous set of talks. A lot of people come on stage and do what I call the shit I've done lectures, where they spend an hour just talking about all the stuff they've done and all the stuff they have on their website. These guys were exceptionally generous in talking through the principles of their practice and how they work, and talking about the larger kind of meta-narratives around the production of the things that inspire them, and how they actually go behind the scenes and really make their stuff. Normally in these kind of sessions, I try and draw out larger, more conceptual themes that link these two people, but I thought in that spirit, what we might be able to do tonight is just talk in more practical terms about how these guys work and how they get in a position to do the sorts of things that they do, so that everyone here in the audience that's passionate about doing it might find their own path and find their own way to start to do this sort of stuff. So if you do have questions as well about how these guys get to where they got to, maybe we can start to draw that out in the Q&A as well. But I'll kick it off just to warm up the crowd and talk about some of these themes. Ash, in the introduction, I was setting you up as what I call a nondescript, which is a term from biology that they use to describe animals that don't fit into normal systems of classification. And in a way, both you guys are nondescripts, in that Ash, you're both a director, an animator, a creator of your own independent films, but then also working in various forms as a motion graphic designer or a modeler or a designer on big blockbuster films as well. Mike, you're a concept designer that uses 3D when everyone else is using 2D, and you're a brand strategist and now a film critic. Can we talk a bit about the successes or the problems of being these kind of generalists within an industry that does its best to try and put people in boxes? Like, what's the resistance to people like you that can do so many different things and that operate across these different territories? What are the opportunities that presents, and what are the problems that are put in front of you?
You go first now. No, you go first.
Okay.
One of you go first.
All right. That's a great question. And first and foremost, thank you guys, everybody, for being here. Give yourself a hand. Oh, awesome. So the topic of generalist versus specialist, I guess, right? Yeah, I've found lots of problems in my career with, like, hey, what is it that you do? And I would say, well, I do all these things. They're like, okay, well, how do I put you in a box? I'm like, we don't do it in the first place. And so it's kind of difficult because the industry itself, if we're talking mainly about like Hollywood film industry, it's kind of difficult because they're like, well, how do we pay you for the time that we charge for you to be on the job? So it's been kind of difficult, and I kind of try to fit into different aspects. But for me, in my life outside of working on films, I just look at the opportunity to be a creative person, and I try not to even think about what program do I use or what route do I take. I just look at my curiosity as the device to overcome certain things, and I don't even think about those things. I just try to, I have a question or a curiosity in life, and I'm just trying to obtain that by fulfilling my life with those solutions of just trying to make these things possible. So I think that the future is for the generalist. Honestly, I really do. I think the future is for the generalist. It used to be for the specialist, but it's changing now. So it's my perception on it. I'm sure Mike would probably agree.
Yeah, I would agree with the sentiment that being a generalist is very, very useful. It's important to have some level of specialization. So if you start with something you're interested in, becoming proficient and becoming very expert at that is very good. But then there will be many, many people that will also be proficient and expert at that. So what gives you that special sauce is the ability to move between disciplines. That does come with the challenge of how do you come up with a title for yourself that is going to represent your skills. But I guess that's inevitable. But if you keep on working hard at it, eventually you'll form your own kind of unique, I don't know, brand, I guess. I just guess you have to keep on fighting through it. But for sure, I do believe in generalization. Like, the more you know across a broad spectrum, the more you have perspective on a problem from different angles, and that makes you valuable.
Yeah, I would say that, but I'd also counter what I would said and what we talked about is it is important to be very good and proficient at these things. So, I mean, a generalist, not in the sense that you just kind of halfway are okay at things. I think you need to be very good at all of the things, and I think that helps you. You know, I think if you have a weakness, it'll show in your art, but I think it's really important to always be working on all the attributes to make you multifaceted. Because I really do believe that the future is in generalized knowledge and sharing and understanding, like, oh, I know how to do real-time VR stuff, or I know how to do CGI stuff, or I know how to draw, or and originally all that stuff comes down to, if you were in the workshop with Mike the other day, you would see that the idea that everything comes from dissecting the brief and breaking it into metaphor. So you have to have original thought, you have to have a thought process in how you interact with things, and then you have to break them down. And from that, you can go into sketching and dissecting and translating that to people. So it's long-winded, I realize, but I just didn't want to say, like, it's okay to be a generalist, that you suck. That's not right. I'm not saying that. You should be very good, but you should be very good broadly, rather than just, I'm only a 3D CGI modeler. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how these forms of general practice actually affect things like the business models within which you both operate. Like, it's pretty rare that at events like this we get up on stage and we talk about business models. I mean, you kind of started it by doing slides of Excel spreadsheets or Google Docs and stuff,
yeah.
But we can keep it going, because I think that actually a conversation around these kind of models of practice is an extraordinarily radical one, you know, even more radical than showing some cool film or animation, because it speaks at the very heart of how we put ourselves in positions to make that type of work, right? Like, I mean, yes, you work on big Hollywood blockbuster films, but the stuff that we all know you for is the independent stuff that you do with your friends on no budget or your own out of your own pocket, and that you launch online, not through any kind of platform, not by hustling for Netflix. You just go and make it, you know. And Mike, you know, you've developed a model of practice where you come onto a job as a concept artist to design a spaceship, and then you end up as a level designer, taking 10 other people's jobs, and then you go and you do that, and then you go and sit on the beach in Asia for a while doing nothing, until another offer drops in your inbox that's just as interesting. So how do you actually set up the economy of your practices? Like how do you fit into an industry that only pays you necessarily to do one thing? You know, you're both freelancers, but like, just, you know, let's open the box and actually talk a bit about how this works in really practical terms.
Sure. You want to go?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, so your ability that you learn gets you in the door, and then the things that you've taken the time to become proficient at allow you to push your boundaries when you get in. So if someone introduces you into a company because of your concept art skills or your modeling skills or your animation or your VFX, if there's something else that you care about enough that you've made it something you're good at, once you're in the door, you have an opportunity to solve problems within a production. But the first thing you need to do is get in the door, and that means you first need to open that door with an ability. For me, at least, I got in the door with certain companies for some skills, like concept art or modeling. And then when I was in the door, I would offer up or demonstrate, not offer up, that's not the right word. I would take the initiative and demonstrate how I could solve one of their problems that they didn't know how to solve. And that kind of takes the initiative of saying, I care enough about this problem, I'm going to solve it. And you have to go outside of their expectation of you. So it's kind of a bootstrap operation. You get in, then you level up a tiny bit, then you open a new door, then you level up again, you open a new door. So my first job was illustration and 3D modeling, and then, well, for example, when I went to a studio called Blur in Los Angeles, I was invited by Tim Miller, the Deadpool director. And he had invited me because I had done some analysis on YouTube of Terminator 2, and he had asked me a specific request about something that I declined, but then I saw an opportunity with something else that he was doing that was really exciting, and I said, dude, I can help you with this instead. So I know you have faith in me, put that faith into me doing this instead. And because of that faith of demonstration, he put that faith, and then I managed to move into a new area. So it's kind of you need to gain the trust to move into each new tiny progression in your career.
That's great that you bring up trust, because ultimately we're just communicating ourselves to one another. And when you first start off something, you need to have that trust with your client or your collaborators. And it's so important to have that ability to have that trust in your, not only with them, but first and foremost with yourself. And so being able to know that you can trust yourself to deliver the goods, if not, 90%, but at least 100% when it's delivered and due. We have different styles of life too. I'm a family guy. I live at home. I work from home. My wife is my producer. But you are a nomad, and you kind of, so it's proof that it works. But I think it comes down to the mind state, if anything. You have to be first curious. You have to be self-critical, because that's where the growth comes. And I think that you have to be willing, you have to have a good work ethic, I think, because you have to, I often will just work until it's done. And I know that's unhealthy, but that's really important to have that work ethic, because if I don't deliver the goods on time, then I'm not taken seriously, and then my trust breaks. But there's a reason why you do what you do, and at the level that you do, because you're self-critical and you're willing to put forth the effort to do it. But the reason why I bring up that he's more nomadic in comparison is that it works for all dynamics of lifestyle, I think. Single man, he's single, ladies, and a single man traveling the world, and then a married man who's traveling and working from home. So it doesn't matter. I think it all works together as long as you have those attributes if you're curious and you're self.
And I think going with that, the fact that everyone's different, everyone here is going to feel moments where they are extremely critical of what they do. I'm sure that everyone at some point in this room does something and then thinks, fuck, this is shit, I am shit, everything's awful, I should stop. I can tell you that's not an unhealthy response, because that's the kind of response you need to motivate yourself to move forward. So I wouldn't necessarily criticize that response. What you do need to do is balance that with the occasional self-congratulation of, oh fuck, well I leveled up. I just did something new that frankly was difficult for me yesterday, and today it's something that I've mastered. It's like, what's that quote? Don't measure yourself against other people, measure yourself against who you were yesterday. Yeah. If you keep improving incrementally, it's okay to be critical, but you want to balance that out, with the occasional, yeah, I did good, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm intrigued that it took us like Strelka to get all three of us on stage, but essentially for the most part, most of us are based in California, and it's a testament that the way that you guys work, that you avoid meetings in LA for the most part. Like, your business isn't done in the lobby of the Chateau Marmont. We're in a really interesting moment right now where the technologies that you guys use to make your work is now extraordinarily democratized. Like the idea that you could do a tribute act to Star Wars from your office the size of this stage in the mountains between LA and San Diego would have been nuts just a few years ago. And now, like you said, we can sit and watch YouTube tutorials of Cinema 4D, and as long as we've got enough time and talent, we can crunch this stuff out on a desktop, not with a multi-million-dollar budget and a Silicon Graphics rendering engine. So we're at a really exciting time where all of these different forms of practice, all of the different kind of setups and lifestyles that you're talking about can actually produce work and art that sits at a level of massive Hollywood productions. And that, for me, is a really exciting time, because it means that we can make different kinds of stories, not just the stories that are domains of blockbusters, but weird, abstract visual experiments into what it means to be human. And maybe you can talk a bit about that, about the democratization of the tools and the way that even in Russia, it's an extraordinary context where there's a huge range of concept artists and concept designers making incredible work. They don't need to be in LA to do it. And that it's the tools that kind of have empowered people to do that, right?
I think it all comes down to how bad do you want it? It doesn't matter your location or your gender or where you come from. I grew up very poor, like single mom. I could have had every excuse in my life to fail, and I just chose not to. So I think it's really important to just look at your dreams, your aspirations, aim big, and not look at, I need to be at this location at this time. That I think for me, it's all about manifesting your reality. You shift, Steve Jobs would call it the reality distortion field. You shift your reality to bend to your will and your ambitions. And I'm 1,000% on that. So whether you're living in Moscow as an artist or you're in LA, I don't see there as being a big difference. To be personally, having worked in the industry for as long as I have, I've avoided the LA system my entire career because I don't like that system. I just feel like you can do what you want based on your own ambitions. It might take you longer, it might be harder, but at least you're earning it. I look at life as like a wall that you're building, and every brick that you put on there is an experience. And I would think it would be bad of life to not put that wall together, you know? It never added up to me. I feel, maybe that just comes from my work class mentality, but I believe in hard work and earning your day and spending your time towards a goal that makes sense. Because, I mean, there's nothing more fulfilling than working hard towards a goal and achieving it. For me, at least, I live for that. It's not the end goal, it's the day that you do the work and the people that you surround yourself with that adds up to the greater sum, and for me, that's important. So, a long rant, I'm sorry, but I believe that it doesn't matter, and it's up to you to have the ambition to go further beyond and not use a simple excuse that I don't live in LA, so I can't make it. Build a film industry here. Do it in your office. Who cares? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Power to the people.
I agree with that. And I also think that there's cycles that happen, and right now, for example, the products that Hollywood is most famous for, they seem to me at least to have reached a kind of saturation point. I mean, we have every month or every couple of weeks, it seems, there's a new blockbuster tentpole movie.
Usually a remix too.
And it's usually a remake, and I think there's franchise fatigue, and actually the world is looking for new inputs. The world is looking for new interpretations. And when I go on ArtStation, for example, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with ArtStation. I guess there's a mixed bag here. ArtStation is kind of like can you raise your hand if you know what ArtStation is?
Yeah, I mean,
okay. There's a fair amount.
It's a huge site.
So it's a huge website where people post their artworks, their production work, their personal, their professional, and it's kind of like everything's there. But the people that stand up, like stand up above everything else, is when they come up with something kind of idiosyncratic and unique. And I think that the more you think outside of the conventions, the more you take inspiration from stuff that's not mainstream, the more you have a chance of grabbing attention. Because right now there's franchise fatigue, there's fatigue of, I personally think that the Avengers, as successful as it is, it's been going for a long time, and now there's going to be new blood coming through, and people that have new interpretations will be most valuable.
It's up to us to create that. We're the creators of the future, so why not take that and make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, but you guys also do work on these big productions, and Mike, you talk at length about your passion for like Terminator, Jurassic Park, Contact, of course, and you're about to devote 2 years of your life to a tribute to Star Wars, the film franchise that started the tradition of the blockbuster in many ways. When Hollywood gets it right, though, they make work and stories that transcend all kinds of audiences, that connect to us in ways that no other medium can. We sit in a dark room with tears down our face, or crying and getting stitches of laughter. When it works, it's extraordinary. Why does it so often suck, though? Why does Hollywood so often get it wrong?
I'll start with this one.
And what can they do? What can they do?
Here we go.
What can they do? What can they do better then?
Well, the main thing is that what Hollywood is based upon now is a model of marketing creating quantitative measurements of what is successful. So for example, the original Jurassic Park had 950 shots total. The latest films that come out are between 1,700 and 2,500 shots. The reason that is because you want to gain people's attention by constantly cutting. It's a dopamine response. But it's a false indicator of what is good. It's quantitative, it's not qualitative. Marketing keeps on pushing the production of films towards what's measurable, and that means more VFX, more shots, more dopamine, more whatever keeps people glued to the screen, but it's maxing people out. It's basically making people overwhelmed with stimulus. The important thing that's being lost is that the things that stimulate these reboots is the original films. And the original films, if you look at them qualitatively, if you look at what makes them work through metaphor and what works through the context of story structure and through mythology and psychology, then you quickly realize that none of that quantitative shit means anything. It means jack shit. In fact, it has an inverse correlation to what makes something good. In simple terms, we need to start rediscovering the fundamentals of storytelling, and that means going back to mythology, to psychology, to Joseph Campbell, to the monomyth. That's the reason that these repetitive films don't hit anyone, is because they're being measured on quantitative things that you can measure that don't mean anything. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think that making stories and dealing with making stories on a broad level for a bigger audience is very complicated. Having worked closely with directors and been in productions, it's very complicated. There's so many things behind the curtain that you're not aware of, like actors' egos, or dealing with script things, or you're having just odd people on set that make no sense because they're like grandson to the production guy that's feeding the money to the thing, and you're like, and then the victim at the end of it is the ticket buyer, the person at the end that's wanting to experience something. And the reason why films, let's use Star Wars for example, in my opinion, works so well in the beginning is because it's a story about characters that you're easily able to apply yourself to, and it's a story that's very universally acceptable. And I think that these stories are important, and there's a reason why we tell stories. And I think that movies, in my mind, nowadays are like, as you mentioned, they're more or less like a mathematical equation of, well, we get a lot of likes if we show somebody getting punched in the face 22 times rather than 24 times. And I don't think that adds to the experience of moviegoers. I think that maybe works for like 12-year-old boys playing Call of Duty, or I don't know what that is. But for the general population as a culture to move people forward, we need to have characters that have resonance, characters that develop, characters that we can live with, characters that we can apply ourselves to, and only until we have that and we really use characters and stories to elevate the art form are we going to have the experience that we all really want, which is basically the experience of life, survival, becoming human, living the life that we have, the struggle and the advancement of being a human. And I think that's really what we want ultimately in stories, and I think that's what we're really not getting in the stories that we have more or less in mainstream cinema. There's a lot of great films out, but there's a lot of redundancy and things that I think are just not registering with us. So I could be alone, but yeah, that's how I feel. I just feel like, yeah, it could be better.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick chance before we shut off the live feed and start to play Ash's films, just to open up the conversation to you guys who've been sitting in the freezing cold and the pouring rain for the last couple of hours.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that has any questions for either Ash or Mike? There's a microphone that's going to come around just so you're legible to everyone and the live feed.
And raise your hand, I guess? Is that the way to?
That's what they're doing. Please feel free to ask your question in Russian. Like I said, we're in Russia. We happen to be speaking English, but we have amazing technology that's gonna, like a Babel fish, translate this for us. Go for it.
Что вы думаете об использовании?
Many people, including me, have this psychological block when using 3D models made by other people. Speaking about Kickbash or other programs, it's not a reference, but it's directly used in our job. So what do you think about it? There are many people who are afraid of using other people's work. What do you think about it? How do we see it? Should we avoid using other people's work, or it's okay?
So the concept of using other people's work, kid bashing and stuff, you want me to go on this first? Yeah?
You go first.
So that's a great question, and it's an ethical problem as well. So I guess I can go talk about the topic of doing Star Wars stuff because that's what I'm focusing on. So when I studied Star Wars, I'm studying it as if it's my master's degree. I'm focusing on it 100%. So as I understand Star Wars is they would take Ralph McQuarrie's drawing or Joe Johnston's drawings, and they would have basic silhouettes, but they would take these this is where kind of the term came from, is you take modeling kits and you would take bits and pieces and you would add all these finite details, and that would kind of look good cinematically on the screen. Nowadays, I use kit bashing techniques because I'm trying to mimic or use the same techniques that came from when I was growing up, the things that I love. I'm not so worried, and I think it's almost we're in this phase with CGI where it was kind of the phase with 3D, or I mean with 2D and Photoshop, is people be like, if you're going to use Photoshop, you need to paint every pixel, and this is a bunch of bullshit. And now the kit bashing worked, and it was like the direct opposite. And then now the art is right in the center. I think that everything's in the center. So I think it's the same thing where CGI, if somebody makes a kit of models and they sell it to you and you buy it, well, why wouldn't you use it? You know, if it helps your art be effective, then in my mind, why not? It's there to use. You shouldn't feel bad about it. But if you steal it, then yeah, it's a problem. Or if you're taking something and you're not changing it enough, then you're not adding to the pot of creativity worldwide. So that's an ethical issue. But for myself, I try to change it as much as I can, or elevate it in some kind of capacity so that it becomes something new. That's my take on it, though. What's your take on kit bashing?
I think that the key thing is that it's always good to get inspiration and also to utilize the things that you take value in your work. But you want to have a multitude of inspirations so that you instead of leaning on imitation, you're creating something through bending, breaking, and blending. And if you only have one set of kit bash utensils, then you're not bending, breaking, or blending. You're just repeating. So I think the key is that if you're going to be utilizing kit bash stuff, you want to be using it as a small component. I think there's a quote in Inception to do with when Dom is talking to Ariadne about creating dreams. He actually quotes. He's like, never create whole memories. Use small components, but never recreate the entire scene. Take bits from your experience and place them in, but never make them a major component. And I think that's the main thing, is break the things that inspire you and mix them up until they're no longer recognizable. And then you've made something new. Because that's all creativity is. Like all we're ever doing is taking inspiration and either breaking it or bending it or blending it with something other than what the original inspiration was. You cannot create something new. It's metaphysically not possible. No one creates new stuff. They just reimagine and recycle and reinvent. So just don't make your inspiration too visible. That sounds like a cheapskate, but that's it. Hide your inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, there's a question back there.
Yeah. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for visiting us here in Russia. So, in the 90s, we had this film about Rabbit Roger, animated film. Well, no one actually paid attention to this film except for experts in this field. But the thing is that they had light put both on the animated figure and on the actor as well. So my question is, do you have something of that kind of breakthrough in your industry? like that film in Russia?
Breakthroughs in industry. Yeah. I think that I think we're on the cusp of having real-time rendering inside of virtual spaces, so I think that's coming. I don't know if there's been, to be honest, as we mentioned, our kind of disappointment with the Hollywood system, in a sense. We shouldn't be so cruel because we do work on these projects, but I'm trying to think of like an aha moment. I think in regards to technology, I can't really think of something that's been as revolutionary since like Blade Runner era, I guess. I don't know, or matte painting, so I can't think of something, to be honest. But I think we're on the cusp of creating narrative that's more guided by the viewer itself. So, like Black Mirror has the episode, which I don't think is revolutionary in the sense of that you mentioned. I believe that the art form as filmmaking had stages of pure growth, but I think right now we're all reaping the harvest of people that were braver and smarter and stronger than us, building the art form in which we build what we currently have today. But I think that the evolution of the art form is going to be more immersive, more involving, and it's going to be more like the AI in the movie Her, but we're going to experience it individually through our experience of life. And I think that's coming pretty soon. I'd say we're probably a decade away from it. So that didn't answer your question, but I can't think of anything, to be honest. Can you think of something?
I can't answer your question.
Avatar 3D.
No, I'm not going to do that. I can't think of a direct answer to your question, but I think that what I took from the question is where the future's going, and I think that the future's going in two different directions simultaneously. I think the first direction is that we've lost touch with, let's call it the fundamentals of storytelling, which is what filmmaking is about. And then there's another direction, which is how do we handle VR and augmented reality. And that is going to involve an entirely different set of vocabulary and vernacular and grammar, because when you can't direct an audience, you have to come up with a new way to keep them engaged in an experience. So for me, I personally think that VR and AR, they're these radically new things, which for me, I am absolutely, I have no idea what to do with them. They scare the shit out of me. But to me, I think that there's...
It's augmented life.
It's augmented life, and that's going to require, that's a big breakthrough, but it's going to require an entirely new visionary set of tools
We're the ones who create it.
Yeah.
We are, everybody here, so our destiny is to create that empire. The voyage, the new frontier is in that space. Rather than watching Luke Skywalker become a Jedi, we become Jedis of our own in our own reality, which is then kind of navigated by using these technologies, I think. So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But.
No, not at all, not at all. But I think that my personal take is that these technologies are still going to be driven by the fundamental principles of myth. That sounds weird. We're not going to be able to direct attention, but the breakthrough will be in storytelling techniques.
Yeah.
But without the ability to direct the audience's attention like you do on a film screen.
Yeah, it'll be an evolved experience.
Being Luke Skywalker, like you say, or being Leia.
I mean, that's a very primitive thing, but like my example comes from the movie Her, really. And that movie is so influential in the sense that it's AI that takes a broken person and turns them to whole by using artificial intelligence. So, yeah, it's going to happen. It's really great. Because all we want to have is a good life and to be fulfilled and to be heard and loved. That's the fundamentals of life. So.
Давайте последний вопрос.
And the last question, please.
Hi, thank you very much. It was really great. And the question is as follows. Everybody knows thoughts rule the world. What were the great inspirations, the great some new paradigms that influenced you, maybe in literature, I don't know, maybe in art. What influenced you? What was that that kick that made you create?
So main inspirations that made us who we are as creators today.
Хочешь начать? Мне кажется, что
clear because of all my attributes to things, but a lot of my inspirations, I think they come from a nostalgic, psychological connection to my childhood. As a child, it's kind of what I say in my reel. As a child, I would sit and wander, and it was all about being a wandering child without limitations as a human, as an adult, basically. So films like Ghost in the Shell or Akira would really strike me. Blade Runner, Star Wars, all these things. So I'm looking back to my childhood as an inspiration as to when I would receive things very raw and honestly. So a lot of my inspirations actually come from my childhood and how I perceived art around me from those things. As an adult, I process them so differently because I analyze them with like a critical mind as to like, well, how is it made, and breaking down the science, and it kind of removes the magic behind, like, you know, when you lift the curtain and you see the Wizard of Oz, you kind of, oh, okay, well, all right. So, but my main inspirations actually come from the influential films and the things that I interacted with as a child. And I'm constantly, all my life, I'm just trying to get back to that childlike self, which is just joy and fulfillment of just being creative at all possible times. So, yeah.
I think when I was younger, one of my main things that I got really excited about and rewatched many, many, many times was Back to the Future. But when I watch it today, I can't enjoy it for the simple fact that it was designed for the specific period of my life. And I think that one of the big measurements of what inspires people is when you can watch it as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, as a grandparent. And for me, the ultimate inspiring films, I'm not a grandparent or a parent, but the films that survive from when I was 6 to when I was 16 to when I was 26 to now, those are my inspirations. And those are the stories like Star Wars or Terminator 2, which is one of my big favorites, Jurassic Park. So for me, the most inspirational films are the stories that don't stick to an age limit. That for me is that is the ultimate high art. If you can make a film like Spielberg does, where you can appease artistically a 5-year-old and a 70-year-old, you're a fucking god. Like, yeah.
Agreed.
We're going to begin our little changeover to the sun is set enough that the luminosity of the screen is appropriate for Ash's films. While we shift the chairs around, if you do have more questions for these guys, then do run and come up.
I have to use the restroom. I'll be right back.
But
too much beer.
Don't go anywhere because we're continuing this conversation just in a different part of this space. And we're going to project up on the screen. We're going to say goodbye to the people on the live stream. Please stick around. We've got another kind of 40 minutes or so left where we go through all these films. And hopefully you'll see a lot of the themes and the discussions that we're having here being kind of unpacked a little further and put up on the screen. Both of these guys are extraordinary storytellers, and I think just following on from where you guys just left off, like the reason why I like to run these kind of events and the reason I do it in a place like this, an architecture, urban and design institute, is because in a way we're all kind of storytellers, and I'm a firm believer in the power of fiction as a real form of engaging with a world that's so strange and bizarre and screwed up that oftentimes these forms of practice and storytelling and fictions are the only way to struggle and to wrestle with a reality that's too weird to grasp. So really these events are a call to arms to try and get all of you to continue and to start making these kinds of stories, and it's a real pleasure to share the stage and to share the evening with two proponents of this model of using fiction as an extraordinary way to engage with the world and as a vessel within which to encode critical ideas. So hopefully all of you here and at home watching the live stream can take up that mantle and start making stuff, and as Ash says, to be prolific. So think about that as we change over and we jump up on the screen. And thanks for coming again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.